Welcome to another one of our interview features for the International Conflict Resolution Center. For those of you who are just joining us or have not watched our interviews in the past, the International Conflict Resolution Center is a not-for-profit research center based in Washington, D.C. We specialize in studying so-called frozen conflicts and other sorts of danger zones and conflicts within Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus in particular. We are looking for solutions to these problems to ameliorate the plight of internally displaced persons, and we look to major parties in the region to respect international borders and international border integrity. So that is what we do, and we are very pleased today to have Dr. Emil Avdaliani with us. He has published for SEPA, for RUSI, for the Begin Sadat Center on Peace, and for Caucasus Watch. And now he's going to be publishing for the ICR Center. So welcome, and thank you so much, Emil.
Thank you for having me.
Before we start, the article that you're going to be publishing for us on Russia's separatist empire, could you give us a quick synopsis or preview of what your major findings are?
Sure. Basically, I was arguing in my piece that as against the long-held views that Russia's separatist empire works perfectly for Moscow in terms of stopping its neighbors from joining Western-led, whether it's military, economic organizations or alliances. I argued in my article that Russia actually lacks a long-term vision on how to develop those regions, on how to use the resources which those regions have, how to improve visibility of those regions on international arena, how to increase the level of recognition of those areas on international level. And I believe that on all those levels, except for the simple prevention of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine from joining NATO and EU, I believe Moscow failed to be proactive, maybe even reactive, and failed to be successful in implementing a long-term vision which would essentially maybe not in the end absorb all those regions into Russia, but at least create a system where all those populations living in those close territories essentially would look up to Russia as the only solution to their problems. And what I see is that many of those people living in those separatist territories, they're fleeing these regions, mainly actually to the host countries. I mean, the countries they initially broke off, or tried to break off from. And I think that there are even hints and even trends within the Russian political elites too, which see that the elites in those separatist regions, they became increasingly rapacious, increasingly essentially trying to get as more finances as possible from metropolis, I mean from Moscow. And this also worries Moscow because the results and the benefits are not seen at all.
Well, before we talk about the Gali region in Georgia, does this topic that you just described, does this relate to the book that you have coming out soon? Because I believe you have a book coming out.
Yes.
How does this relate to the book?
That's essentially part of the great power competition which is emerging in the South Caucasus, and I essentially described Russia's failure in its separatist empire within its not very successful policy towards the South Caucasus. So I argue in my book that, as against the argument that Russians are building new military bases, especially after dispatch of peacekeepers into Nagorno-Karabakh, I argue that Russians essentially are losing prestige, and that is why they are relying more on military tools. And if you see what was going on throughout these 3 decades after they follow the Soviet Union, there is an increasing militarization of foreign policy of Russia towards the South Caucasus. Whereas other countries try to be more diplomatic, use economic means, Russians are building military bases, which says a lot about the success generally, or lack of success of Russia's foreign policy.
Thank you for that preview, because that's going to be an important topic for the ICR Center as we move along and try to find creative ways of, displacing or dispersing and ameliorating these kinds of conflicts and prevent them basically from becoming hot conflicts. But let's go to the Gali region. Can you contrast, let's say pre-2008, pre-invasion to now? I mean, what has been important about this region, and what is now the major difference in terms of how ethnic Georgians are being treated there now, as opposed to right before the invasion?
Yeah, thank you for this question. The differences are huge, I would say, because what you see in Abkhazia in the recent years, and even in the recent months, actually, is that Sukhumi, along with its Russian allies, which are called in Georgia as essentially occupiers of sovereign territory of Georgia, they are trying to win hearts and minds of the residents of Gali. This means basically doing everything so that residents of this tiny administrative territory do not flee the region into the rest of Georgia, into Samegrelo or other parts of Western Georgia or Tbilisi, and stay in Gali, take Abkhazian citizenship or Russian citizenship, and essentially say no to the Georgian language and to everything Georgian. And if you compare this with what was happening previously, even several years ago, and as you argued, well, even before 2008, I would say that the situation was not as strict and hard for those citizens in Gali, for those residents in Gali, as it is now. It was, well, the administrative line was more porous. You could reach easily either Samegrelo or vice versa, Gali region. Now you have one or two small sections where you could essentially move across this administrative line, and which could easily be closed down.
Also,
And
you have freedom of movement prior, and now you have almost none. Is that basically what you're saying?
yeah, well, overall, I would say that you had far more, well, bigger, I would say, freedom of movement in South Ossetia, so-called South Ossetia, than in Abkhazia. But if you compare, as you said, before 2008 with after 2008 period, differences are palpable, I would say,
I
huge.
understand. Did what are we talking about? The population as a whole, or just ethnic Georgians who are being restricted?
Those are mainly ethnic Georgians. So Gali district is populated mainly by if not exclusively by ethnic Georgians. And the population of this district varies according to various, unconfirmed reports and unconfirmed statistics, but it could be around 50,000 people, which is huge um, by standards of small region of Abkhazia.
Did now are ethnic Russians or others moving into that region to displace ethnic Georgians, or is the population basically stable?
I think population is stable. It might be decreasing because many people move from Gala district into the rest of Georgia, but
And we're going to talk
I
about
do,
that too. Don't worry.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
going to talk about definitely. But go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. But I do not see that ethnic Abkhazians, Armenians, Greeks, or Russians actually move to take up those territories uh, in Galia, at least for the moment. Yeah.
Now, is there a situation going on now that is almost, I'm not going to use a strong term like ethnic cleansing because that's a very strong term, but are there ethnic restrictions? Are there restrictions on language and culture that are now being imposed that we've never seen before in that region?
Yes, exactly. Actually, even several months ago, a couple of months ago, the new restriction was imposed upon school children in Gali district. So there are basically several schools in the whole district. Before 2021, you could have received um, instructions in Georgian language in the 11th grade. So it was allowed. Well, several years ago, you could have received instruction in Georgian from 9th grade. So you have this incremental imposition of restrictions essentially on Georgian language, which ultimately ended uh, in, in the final, with the final basically restriction saying that absolutely no Georgian language instruction will be allowed from now onwards, which is harmful, hurtful, I would say, and hurting the population on the ground, and basically the forceful imposition of Russian language is actively pursued because Gali residents are very unlikely to learn Abkhazian language, and Sukhumi government actually pursues this line. Better to have them learn Russian, and then maybe they will be sort of distancing themselves from the rest of Georgia than imposing some difficult Abkhaz language on Gali residents.
That's I mean, there are people who would think that's almost diabolical because you are concentrating on a younger generation, and that would therefore entail children being wedged off from their parents and grandparents in terms of culture, language,
Yeah.
even regional allegiance. Is there any resistance to this? Within families that you know of? I mean, I know it's very hard to resist the Sukhumi government, but I mean, I could see this creating problems, psychological problems severely for ethnic Georgians within their families.
Yeah, from what I see on the ground here in Tbilisi, is that uh, I teach in one of the universities where I have plenty actually of students, many of students who moved from Gali district into Tbilisi. So, and I think when I heard now I heard your question, I think I could relate to their thinking that essentially they are leaving their parents, grandparents there because there are no essentially no opportunities. That's one problem, and yet another could be what you are saying right now, that some interfamily, intrafamily, and some some confusion, or not confusion, but to use the the right English term, I would say that tensions which lead to younger generation leaving their homes and seek something elsewhere. Yeah.
Um, I'm just curious in terms of your research and your present knowledge. Does the Sukhumi government really think that this is a viable policy to erase history? Because when you have a situation where you have an internet, social media, no matter how you want to close off people from other ideas, it is extremely difficult to just erase national and regional history and replace it with something new, like this. Do they really think this is going to work, or is this some way of punishing the ethnic Georgians? Because I really don't know how they see this playing out, because you do have so many other ideas coming in, so many other generations, as I said, in the same family that can
Yeah.
correct the record. What's your opinion there?
Uh, well, there are indications that Sukhumi government tries to essentially, gloss over, or not even gloss over, but essentially rewrite the history of this small district. But I think that what they are trying to do for the moment is that, so first, they do not really want to have, as they call it, a Georgianization of Abkhazia by giving the citizenship to all Gali districts, because that would mean that 1/4 of Abkhazia's official population would be ethnic Georgian, and that really hurts for nationalistically minded Abkhaz leadership. But they also cannot really cleanse the territory, so that it's so when you want to be a separate state, democratic state, you cannot really do all those things. So they understand this, and they know that the official reaction, international reaction, would be very, very negative, involving closing of all the regional offices of international organizations in Sukhumi, and there are some of them, and that could entail huge repercussions for the separatist region. So both lack of resources, fear of international reaction, perhaps even non-interest from the Russian officialdom in this situation overall. All those circumstances basically create the uh, situation where we are now. So in limbo, I would say, basically, where it doesn't really move in either of directions. But overall, I think over the past several months, you see certain activism coming from Sukhumi. So I think over the next month, several months, or perhaps maybe in next 2 or 3 years, we would see a sort of a collection of laws, or a string of moves from the official government in Sukhumi towards this region, to close it off or either integrate it better into the rest of Abkhazia.
What effect has the pandemic had? If you can give us a little information on that. Has it had a big effect in terms of this crisis, or is it just another factor that's out there?
That's a very important question, I think, because uh, indeed over this year and a half, we see a deterioration of economic life, social life, including education life in Gali district, and you see the increasing number of youngsters or mid-aged people fleeing Gali district into Samegrelo, and you see also the problems they encounter. And as you might well remember, several months ago, there was one case of several people forcefully crossing the sort of the river and dying. So you might expect other many other cases, or even unreported cases of people essentially fleeing the territory to get into some bigger markets in Zugdidi or other parts of Western Georgia, to get some amenities and basic things for livelihood. And all of that was caused by a pandemic and also by restrictions imposed from Sukhumi on the administrative line. So without those impositions, there would have been some possibilities to move along across the line into Zugdidi and basically bargain one thing for another and just simply trade there. But with those impositions, you see no possibility essentially, because Gali residents rarely go to Sukhumi for various reasons, for security, some nationalistic reasons, and some other because of other problems. And their mindset is towards the south, so towards Samegrelo and the rest of Western Georgia. And I believe that pandemic coupled with restrictions from Sukhumi government essentially create, I wouldn't say a catastrophic situation, because that might be an overstretch, but it's certainly a deterioration of the already fragile situation in the Gali district.
I don't know if you would know this, because neither of us are public health experts, but is there a situation where you think a lot of the residents in Gali would definitely want to come into Western Georgia to be vaccinated, if versus what the Sukhumi government is doing up there? Because it seems that that was motivating people to put their lives in danger to cross the river just to get basic health care. Do you think that there would be a situation where a lot of people would try to leave the region just to get vaccinated?
Yes, that's actually exactly what's going on, what's happening since the pandemic started a year and a half ago. So we've been seeing the increasing number, at least in 2020, of Gali residents essentially leaving the territory to get either hospitalized, vaccinated, or essentially get some treatment and medication. First, because the pandemic situation in Abkhazia itself is very dire, very difficult, and corruption and everything simply kills every possibility for effective vaccination. And there is also a Russian-led effort, or I would say half-hearted effort, led by vaccine diplomacy from Moscow to basically involve Abkhazia into its vaccination programs. But Gali residents were treated and are treated in Tbilisi, but they fear for their life and essentially for life of their their families and so on. So they are hesitant to leave even for this basic thing, which is vaccination. Yeah.
Well, let's switch to what can be done or what might be done. Let's start with non-governmental entities. I mean, what can think tanks and other organizations do, even in something as small as recon or reconnoitering the situation there, fact finding? I mean, is that a possibility, or is this region almost curtained off from other from groups, even the Red Cross or something like that?
No, I believe it's not entirely cut off from the rest of the world, I would say, because I personally have a couple of friends who actually have relatives there, and they travel to Gali district, and they come and just provide some information from the ground, from on the ground, I would say. But I believe that when it comes to the work of international organization in Gali district, Sukhumi separatists in Sukhumi, they are very sensitive on that front, and they believe that that's essentially the fifth column which they have in Abkhazia. And in the future, if they do not win hearts and minds of Gali residents, they might actually, the region might be used by Tbilisi, for some futures, so-called invasion and so on, so on. So they are very sensitive to all the international and all the Georgian in the Gal district. For that reason, I believe that there is little what can be done unless you contact Sohumi from Tbilisi, which essentially would mean recognition of this territory. And as you know, in Tbilisi, very few think of that, or if any at all.
Well, let's look at the governmental response. I mean, what can Tbilisi do? I mean, is it a situation where, we've heard the term soft power a lot when we went over on the trip recently in August. What kind of tools can Tbilisi use to, let's talk about the whole range from just reaching out and helping or establishing better communications with the displaced persons in the country. And let's take it to an extreme. What can they do? What do you think that they can do within the realm of possibility to create a situation where this might actually create some kind of I wouldn't say reintegration totally, but at least something going in that direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for this question. Well, efforts have been made, and as you said, the whole range of efforts essentially. So education-wise, government in Tbilisi provides free access to the universities across Georgia to all those Gali residents. I mean, the recent move by the Georgian Ministry of Education stipulated that essentially all those who try to pass the national exam but could not cross the administrative line because of those restrictions we mentioned earlier, they will be enrolled into whatever universities they want. So that's one of the tools, one of the soft power tools. Yet another soft power tool is building hospitals and necessary infrastructure along the administrative line, so that the people across the line, they know that there are better opportunities for healthcare, education, trade, and other things, and they will be crossing this line to get all the things they need essentially. But Georgian government looks beyond the Gali district residents, that they look at ethnic Abkhazians too, so that they too could see that just across the Nguri River, there are much more opportunities, freer opportunities actually, freer, I would say, education and healthcare than in Abkhazia itself or in Sochi and the rest of Russia. And I think that the efforts, well, some efforts were quite successful, because we know statistically that very many people actually cross the administrative line, and they are not only residents from Gali districts, they are ethnic Abkhazians too, actually.
I didn't know that. I didn't know there were ethnic Abkhazians moving that way.
Not many, but there are, yeah.
Now, before I move on to some questions that are going to wrap up, one thing did strike me when we were visiting in our field study in August. The notion that these regions were always somehow not a part of Georgia, and that was being pushed by the Russians and used as an excuse, to occupy these territories. Given your thesis in terms of your book and the article that you're going to be publishing with us, how is that going to be sustainable in the face of all of this soft power kind of efforts? Because again, what I said, it's almost impossible to invent a history of a country that doesn't exist when you have, hundreds of years of history and then current information pouring in. I mean, how is it sustainable that they really can create a new nation out of nothing when all of this is going on? I mean, and in addition, some of the movements that you described can rise to things that are actionable by the UN. When you talk about erasing culture, you talk about taking children, out of their cultural ambit and imposing another one on them. That rises almost to a legal level where international organizations can come in and condemn that. So again, I want to just come back to, why does the Sukhumi government think that this is sustainable? Is Russia putting things in their heads, or do they really believe this, or are they just desperate?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because that essentially goes into the heart of the conflict which Georgia has with Russia. So essentially, it's about nearly almost entirely fake narrative which is being imposed, developed by Russian historians. Well, not many, but not all, I would say, but many Russian historians and the entire Russian officialdom, that Abkhazia has always been independent historically. But in fact, what you have from the Georgian sources, whether it's in ancient times or medieval period, is that Abkhazia, like Kakheti, Kvemukartli, or Samachablo, or Guria, or Samegrelo, always was a mere historic region of Georgia, with Georgian language and all the things of Georgian monarchy of the medieval age. So if you visit Abkhazia, you see the churches, medieval churches with Georgian inscriptions. Abkhaz kings were communicating and writing in Georgian. The basically language in the church in the medieval period was in Georgian. So essentially, you see that the region was a real part of Georgian, world, I would say. It's in the medieval period. Later on, when the monarchy was disintegrated finally in the 15th century, so you see the splintering of various territories, and you see the emergence of local nationalism. And under that point, the Russian and Abkhaz nationalists essentially developed the idea that if you had Abkhazia always, in the medieval period as a name, that meant that the region was a separate ethnic group and a separate kingdom. While in reality, that was, strikingly different. And I believe that that's the narrative which is very appealing to Abkhaz nationalists, appealing to those in Russian officialdom who pursue semi-imperial, I would say, views towards the Russian neighborhood. And I think that you cannot really, as you said, impose your new vision while you have, all those technologies and all this research made by Western scholars, Georgian scholars, and everyone who are freer in academic life. And I think that over time you would see, a light at the end of the tunnel. Perhaps, maybe it's a bit poetic from my side, but some progress might be there. But at the same time, I think that what we have on the ground is the geopolitical problem. So unless Russia decides geopolitically to leave the region, you might not have any progress, even if academically and culturally Abkhazia will be reintegrated with the rest of Georgia.
So does that encapsulate basically your view then of just what the near future holds? Is it, unless there's a geopolitical...
a bit unfortunate, or I would say not very positive vision from my side, because I look at the problem from a realist perspective, and I see that for Russia, it's a military base, it's the access to the South Caucasus from the North Caucasus, and one of those access routes goes through the seashore in Abkhazia, and that's that's basically the basis of this conflict. It's geopolitical conflict essentially, and then of course Russian nationalists or officialdom try to basically build an argument for their geopolitical intervention. That's that Abkhazia has always been independent, which, as I said, is untrue historically.
So to sum up, and then we'll wrap up. Is it possible, because you know how Americans like things tied into neat little nuggets? Is it fair to say that the fear of the Russians and the Sukhumi government is that Gali will be the breakaway of the breakaway? In other words, you see what I'm saying? Is that basically what's motivating this?
Yes, exactly. That's actually a very, very good description of what I try to describe as a fifth column.
Right.
So essentially, that the fear is that the small region with dense population could be used in the future by Tbilisi, NATO, and some of this a bit crazy ideas, of course, from the separatist side, but still used as a fifth column, as a ground, as jumping point, launching pad, or something like that towards future Georgianization of Abkhazia. A bit scary scenarios from Sukhumi.
Well, thank you, Emil. This is Dr. Emil Avdaliani, who is going to be publishing an article on the Russian separatist empire and its unsustainability. We want to come back to this question of Abkhazia and South Ossetia too in the future. And I'm urging people who follow us to look for Emil's work with us going forward. And I want to thank people who are signing in later and looking at this interview as a resource. Thank you in advance for joining us. Again, I'm Christopher Chambers. I'm the chairman of the board of the International Conflict Resolution Center. And we've been talking to Emil Avdaliani live from Tbilisi.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your time, and please look forward to this being posted on our website and on YouTube very soon, and look at the rest of our content. I urge you to do that and follow us on Twitter at Conflict Center. So we're on Twitter at Conflict Center, on Facebook, and soon to be on Instagram. So thank you very much from Washington, D.C. Good afternoon and good evening.
Thank you very much.